You've come seeking terror, have you? This Valentine's Day, I bring you 3 true horror stories that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about love. But be warned, not all hearts are full of romance. Some are filled with darkness. So, brace yourself. These tales will haunt you long after they've ended. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, or you may find your own tale woven into the next one.
I planned a weekend getaway for my girlfriend and I for Valentine's Day at a bed and breakfast on the countryside, about 5 hours away. Originally, when I reached out to this specific property a month ago, they said they were fully booked. Luckily, about a week ago, I received a call from the manager saying they had availability. My girlfriend, who I've been with for 4 years, had been hinting at us needing a break for a while, so I jumped at the chance. After some research online, I came across this bed and breakfast. It seemed very popular with a bunch of great reviews, and the photos were exactly what we wanted: cozy, rustic, tucked away in nature. I thought it would be perfect, a chance to relax, disconnect, and spend quality time together. When I told my girlfriend we'd be going, she was really excited. Quite frankly, so was I. We both have been working so much and needed a break. We decided to start driving out there around 11 a.m., hoping to get there by dinner. The first few hours of the drive were calm, the landscape flat and open. But then, somewhere around the 4-hour mark, the roads started to change. What had been wide paved highways turned into narrow, winding gravel paths. The trees on either side of the car grew taller, denser, and darker, their branches almost touching overhead. It was late afternoon by then, and the fading sunlight cast long shadows across the road. I noticed how quiet it had become. There were no sounds of birds, no rustling of the trees. I glanced over at my girlfriend, who was staring out the window. She didn't seem as relaxed as I was, and I couldn't blame her. The road was starting to feel more remote, more isolated. When booking this place, I didn't realize just how isolated it would be. I knew it would be quiet, but there was nothing and nobody for miles behind us. It felt like we had been driving forever when we finally saw it. At the end of a long, curved driveway was the house. The house looked like something out of a storybook, a traditional English farmhouse with a wraparound porch, large windows, and ivy creeping up the sides. There were no other cars parked out front, but the house looked well kept, freshly painted, like someone cared for it. Still, something about the solitude made me uneasy. We parked in front of the house and got out, but as we made our way to the front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like someone was watching us. I knocked on the door, and it opened almost immediately. A young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, with brown hair to her shoulders, bulging green eyes, and a hollow face, stood in the doorway. Her lips cracked and stretched into a too-wide smile. There was an unsettling anticipation in her gaze. She welcomed us inside, her voice high-pitched but warm. She told us she was glad we could make it and that there had been a last-minute cancellation, so the place was all ours for the weekend. I found it odd that she was so eager to explain the cancellation, but I pushed the thought aside. The inside of the house was even more beautiful than the exterior. Rich wooden floors, antique furniture, and large windows. There was a faint scent of lavender in the air, mixed with something that smelled almost like dust. We walked over to the front desk, and I couldn't help but notice that no one else was here but us. I thought they were fully booked and had one cancellation, but it seemed like all their reservations were canceled. I wondered why. It would make sense now why the young woman was so excited to have at least one customer. It all seemed so odd, but at this point, I'm so tired I don't even bother to ask. I asked the woman what time dinner was. She looked at me with almost an annoyed expression, which quickly changed into an apologetic smile. She said, unfortunately, they were having issues with their stove tonight, but that someone would be by before breakfast to fix it. She offered some small snacks like fruit and crackers. As weird as I thought that was, it really didn't bother me that much. We had stocked up on a bunch of gas station food on the way here, and I wasn't starving or anything. I told her, no problem. The woman led us upstairs to our room. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, and the wooden floors creaked beneath our feet. When we reached the room, I couldn't help but admire it. The bed was large, with soft, comfortable linens. The walls were painted in a light shade of blue, with lace curtains hanging by the window. It was cozy, calming, a perfect place to unwind after a long drive. We got freshened up and decided to explore the grounds. The gardens outside were stunning, flower beds bursting with color, pathways lined with greenery, and a small fountain trickling water in the distance. It was peaceful, almost dreamlike. I couldn't understand why no one else was there. It felt like we had stumbled into a secluded paradise. As we walked, though, I started to feel watched. It was a strange sensation, like someone was always just behind us, waiting for us to turn around. Every now and then, I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at one of the windows. But there was nothing. We went back to our room, and that's when things started getting weird. As we unpacked, my girlfriend paused, a confused expression on her face. She was rifling through her suitcase, muttering to herself. She pulled out several items, her clothes, shoes, toiletries, but then she stopped. She looked at me, frowning. She asked me where her lingerie was that she packed for the occasion. I was confused too. We both searched through the suitcase again, but they were gone. I didn't know how they could have just disappeared, and neither of us had any explanation. She even swore she'd packed them. At the time, it felt like something we could brush off, but looking back, it was definitely a red flag. We both fell asleep that night shortly after, just exhausted from the long drive. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a strange sound coming from the far corner of the room. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then it came again. A soft scraping sound, slow, deliberate, and steady. It didn't sound like the house settling. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving inside the walls. I lay there, listening intently, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the sound grew louder. It was coming from the wall near the foot of the bed. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I could see my girlfriend was starting to stir. I gently shook her awake, but she didn't respond. I tried again, a little more urgently this time, but she just mumbled something incoherent and rolled over. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed and threw on a shirt, my heart racing. I was determined to get some answers, even if it meant waking the woman at the front desk. Maybe she could explain the noise, or maybe there was someone else in the house, another guest who had checked in late. I walked downstairs to the front desk and called out, half expecting someone to respond, but the house was dead silent. There was no one, no footsteps, no sounds, nothing. I called again, and there was no response. I checked every room downstairs. The front desk was empty, and I couldn't find the woman anywhere. I walked through the dining room, peering into the sitting area, but there was no sign of life. The house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. That's when I heard it. A voice, soft and delicate, but utterly unnatural. "We like watching you." I froze, my blood running cold. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was no one there. The voice wasn't even coming from one direction. It was like it was coming from everywhere. I stood there, terrified, unable to move. And then, just as suddenly, the voice came again. This time, it was closer. "We like watching you." It was the voice of a woman, but it was distorted, like it was being pulled through something unnatural, stretched out in a way that sent chills crawling down my spine. It was soft, almost sickly sweet, but underlined with something dark. I called out, my voice shaking, "Hello?" But nothing. No response. I ran upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I had to get my girlfriend and leave. When I burst into the room, I shook her awake, frantic. telling her we had to leave now. She was confused, still half asleep, but I couldn't explain it to her. She kept asking why, asking me what was wrong, but I didn't have the words. I was already throwing clothes into the suitcase, frantic, not caring about being neat. I just needed to get out. And then, the lights went out. The entire room was swallowed by darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I heard her gasp beside me. We both scrambled for our phones, our hands shaking, but when I turned on the flashlight, we heard it again. That voice. And this time, it was in the room with us. "We like watching you." It was breathy, almost mocking, like it was enjoying our fear. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I pointed the flashlight around the room, desperate to see anything, any sign of life. But the room was empty. The voice had vanished, but the feeling of being watched didn't. My girlfriend screamed, clutching onto me, her body trembling. We grabbed our bags and bolted for the door. We didn't look back. The house was pitch black, not a single light on, in or outside. I could have sworn I heard fast-paced footsteps behind us as we ran, like someone was chasing us, but I didn't dare to look back. We reached the car, practically throwing our bags into the back seat, and drove off without looking back. As we sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, my breath caught in my throat. There, in the window of the bedroom we had just been in, a light flickered on, and there was someone standing there, still, watching us. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest gas station. I called the police. They arrived not long after, and when they searched the house, they found something even more chilling. The previous owner had died just 3 weeks ago, and the house had been left vacant, awaiting sale. The police found no one there, but there was one thing. When they checked the back door, they found that the lock had been tampered with. They believed this was how they got inside, then went through the owner's registry and waiting lists and found our information. I'm not sure why they chose us or what exactly they wanted from us, but one thing is for sure. We won't be booking any more getaways for a very long time. Next Valentine's Day, we'll be staying home, because after that night, we learned the hard way. Some eyes are better left unseen. It started as a normal night, or at least as normal as Valentine's Day could be when you're single, overworked, and sitting in a nearly empty office building downtown. I had resigned myself to another evening of spreadsheets and client decks. By 7 p.m., the office was deserted, except for Claire, my assistant. Claire was in her early 20s, smart and sharp-witted. Her kindness made her everyone's favorite in our office. We worked well together, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice how attractive she was. I take a lot of pride in my professionalism and would never cross that boundary. Around 8, Claire walked into the conference room carrying a small box of chocolates. She handed them to me and said, "Happy Valentine's Day," with a big smile. I said, "Thanks," as I was genuinely touched. I don't think I've ever received a Valentine's Day present before. I asked her if she had any special plans this evening. She shook her head, "Nope," and jokingly said, "I guess you're stuck with me." I laughed, and we got back to work. The silence of the office was broken only by the hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of papers. About an hour went by, and that's when weird things started happening. It began with the lights. The overhead fluorescents flickered, just once, but enough to catch my attention. Claire didn't seem to notice, so I let it go. But then the sound of something falling echoed down the hall. Claire and I both looked at each other with concern. She asked what I thought it was. I told her it was probably just someone else working late in the office. I was trying to stay calm, but knew that wasn't true. The cleaning crew didn't come on Fridays, and as far as I knew, Claire and I were the only ones left in the building. A few minutes later, I went to grab a file from my office. As I opened the door, a sticky note fluttered to the floor. I picked it up, thinking Claire had left me a reminder. But the handwriting wasn't hers. It said, "You're not alone." A cold, creepy sensation came over me. I glanced around the room, expecting to see someone jump out from behind the desk. No one. I told myself it was a joke, probably something left over from a team brainstorming session. But deep down, I didn't believe it. When I walked back into the conference room, I looked down at the pile of work left to complete. I told Claire we could just call it a night. She told me she had one more thing to complete, and if it was okay if I stayed here with her until she finished. 10 minutes tops, she said. I usually walk Claire to her car in the garage when we both work late. I wouldn't leave her here alone to walk by herself. I told her it was no problem and sat down, continuing my work in the meantime. Claire got up and asked me if I wanted any coffee. I said sure and kept plugging away at my work. As she walked towards the kitchen, she slowed to a stop, her shoulders stiffening. I leaned back in my chair and shouted, "What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away, just stared towards the break room. I got up out of my chair and walked towards her. I immediately followed her gaze. The area was a mess. Cabinet doors hung open, coffee spilled across the counters and floor, and the chairs around the small table were overturned as if someone had thrown them. She asked me if the cleaning crew left this mess. Her voice was uneasy and confused. I told her they aren't here tonight. My chest started tightening. Neither of us moved for a moment. The break room had been spotless earlier. I walked by a couple hours ago and everything was in its place. By that time, everyone else was already gone. Claire took a cautious step forward. I grabbed my phone and followed her as we slowly stepped into the room. It smelled heavily of burned coffee, and there was a single sticky note that was stuck to the inside of an open cabinet that said, "Leave now." There's not many things that can put me on edge or frighten me, but at that moment, all the blood felt like it was rushing out of my body. I told Claire that we needed to leave, now. My voice was shaking but stern and urgent. We both turned around and started walking back to the conference room to get our keys and belongings. Right when we took our first step in, the TV turned on. Claire screamed, then put her hand over her mouth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It displayed a video feed of the conference room, live from an angle above us. I always knew we had a camera there, but it's only used to record meetings. I can't think straight. My head is all over the place. I looked over at Claire, whose hands were shaking. I told her to leave everything and to grab her purse and let's go. As we rushed out the conference room, that's when we heard it. The elevator down the hall dinged. The sound was sharp, startling in the silence. The elevator wasn't supposed to run without a key card after hours. Claire and I both froze, staring at the door. My stomach twisted into a knot. There was no time to hide or move anywhere out of the hallway. The elevator doors opened, but the car was empty. All of the sudden, we heard footsteps behind us. We didn't turn to look back. We started bolting for the staircase, taking the stairs two at a time. We ran through the garage and both hopped in my car and sped out of there as fast as we could. We pulled over about a mile away and parked at a 24-hour grocery store. By then, I finally caught my breath even though my heart was still pounding. Later, I found that the person that was responsible was a woman named Linda. She worked in IT and had been with the company for years. I hadn't noticed her before, but apparently she'd noticed me. Security footage showed her leaving sticky notes and sabotaging the office. When the police searched her apartment, there was a shrine to me. Photos, stolen items from my desk, and a journal filled with entries about how we were meant to be. After this incident, one thought was crystal clear. Next Valentine's Day, no matter what, I'll be anywhere but the office, because some deadlines aren't worth dying for.
When I was 26, I moved to New York after finishing my graduate's degree and found a job in the city. It was my first time living alone, and I was a little nervous. I grew up across the bridge in Jersey, so I wasn't far from family. But after my first year in the big city alone and working crazy hours, I started getting lonely. I had been on some dating apps in the past, but they always ended horribly. Either the guy was just looking for a hookup, or they didn't even have a job. But for the past 6 weeks, I've been chatting with this guy named Alex online. We have a lot in common and have been speaking every day. Late night conversations, flirty texts, the whole 9 yards. Our work schedules are totally opposite, and we never found the right time to connect. Finally, we decided to meet for the first time on Valentine's Day at a local cafe, which I thought was really sweet. I was pretty excited, but also nervous. I mean, meeting someone online can be a bit of a gamble. When I first saw Alex, he looked exactly like his photos, tall with a warm smile. He walked in with a single long-stemmed rose, walked up to me, gave me a soft, gentle hug, and handed me the rose. The night was going great. All of my nerves had settled. We were laughing, sharing stories, and the atmosphere seemed perfect. I was really taken back by him. Even though we had been talking nonstop for 6 weeks, the conversation had no limits. There was no awkward pauses, no red flags. It was a really nice dinner, definitely different from any other guy I've dated online. After dinner, we skipped dessert and asked the server to bring us another bottle of red wine. When she returned with the wine, she opened the cork and poured a substantial amount of wine in our glasses. We both started laughing, probably because we were already pretty buzzed. We lifted our glasses to cheers, and Alex's eyes shift to the side of me. His face goes blank, and I hear him whisper, "Shit." I look behind my shoulder, and there was a very attractive blonde young woman waving at us and walking towards our table. When she gets there, she seems very calm and surprisingly nice. She said she just wanted to come over to say hi, that her name was Amanda, and that she's known Alex since college but hadn't spoken to him in years. She said she was in New York for a few days and thought it was funny to bump into us here. I smiled at her and introduced myself. Alex, on the other hand, did not say one word. He even refused to look at her. I was actually a little shocked. I'm not the kind of woman that gets threatened by bumping into exes or anything like that. We all have a past. So I didn't understand why he felt the need to be so rude. I guess something bad must have happened between them. Right when Amanda walks away, Alex looked up at me and said we needed to go. His whole demeanor changed, and he was in a rush to get out of the restaurant. Once we got outside, I asked him what that was about. He told me that Amanda was one of his exes, and that throughout the years she will pop up and start demanding that they be together again. That in the past he's had multiple restraining orders against her, and that he doesn't trust her. The story sounded a little exaggerated, but I have no reason not to believe him. He then told me that he drank a little bit too much wine and was going to call it a night. I was disappointed because everything shifted so fast, but he was right. We drank way too much wine and my head was starting to spin a bit. So we both hopped in a cab, and he was nice enough to share the ride with me all the way home, even though he lived 15 blocks in the opposite direction. When I got home, I took a shower, got in my PJs, and almost passed out before hitting the bed. I woke up to repeated tapping sounds on my window, like someone was throwing a rock over and over. I live in a brownstone-like apartment, so that would mean someone was either on the stairs or on the sidewalk throwing something to hit my window. I shot up immediately, too scared to go and look. My heart was pounding as I walked slowly towards the window. I kept all the lights off, not wanting to alert whoever was outside that I was here. I stood on the side of the window and moved the curtain slowly. I gasped as I saw a dark figure standing directly at the bottom of my window looking up at me. I couldn't identify who it was because it was so dark outside, and they were wearing what looked like black sweats and a black hoodie. I immediately shut the curtain and waited a few seconds before looking again. The figure was still standing there staring at my window, motionless. Then, all of a sudden, they start slowly raising their hand and waves at me in a slow, sinister movement. There was something so eerie and unsettling about their gesture. I got freaked out, ducked to the ground so the person on the other side wouldn't see me. Moments later, I heard pounding on the entry door to my apartment. It was loud, with a lot of force behind it. It lasted for at least a minute straight, which is actually a long time to be constantly banging on someone's door. I ran into the bedroom to grab my phone and dialed 911. When the police came, No one was outside anymore. They told me sometimes people can get the homes confused, kids get locked out. It's probably nothing to worry about. But they weren't there. They didn't see that dark, mysterious figure lurking around. I've been living here by myself for over a year now. I know all my neighbors. No one in my neighborhood would throw a rock at my window, mistaking it for their own home. The police told me if there were any other disturbances to call them back right away. And then they left. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I couldn't stop wondering who that was or what they wanted. Even scarier, what would have happened if I went to try and find out. The next morning, I felt like a zombie. I was happy the night had passed. I still had an eerie feeling lingering from the night before, but there was no time to dwell in it. I had to get to work. I made myself a much-needed cup of coffee and rushed out the door. I stopped in my tracks. There was an index card with my name on it, and what looked to be a rose cut into pieces scattered across my floor mat outside my door. That's when I remembered I must have left the rose on the table at the restaurant last night. We left in such a hurry, I forgot to grab it. I bent down to grab the card and turned it around. It felt like a huge lump was in my throat, falling down to the pit of my stomach. It read, "You should have opened the door for me last night. Next time, I'll just come through your window." My heart started racing. I immediately turned around to go back inside, slamming and locking the door shut behind me. I could hear myself breathing faster and faster. I grabbed my phone and immediately called Alex. He didn't pick up. I called him 4 times in a row and got no answer. At this point, I decided to call the police again. The officers that showed up this time were different from the officers that came last night. I described everything that happened moment by moment the night before. How I met with Alex, how Amanda came over to say hi, the tapping on the window, and now this. The police took the rose and note for evidence. They asked for Alex's contact information, which I was happy to give them considering he isn't answering my calls all of a sudden. It was strange and out of character for him to do that. We talked every day for over a month, and now, no response. I went back to stay with my parents for a few weeks after that, and eventually moved to a different part of the city closer to my work. I never received any further threats and never heard from Alex again. I would check his social media from time to time to see if he posted anything, but he went ghost. He stopped posting on social media, and he never returned my calls after that Valentine's Day. I don't know what happened to him, and I'm better off not knowing. I wonder sometimes if that was him standing outside my window. Or maybe Amanda. There's no way of finding out for sure, which still brings chills down my spine. I deleted the dating app on my phone and will never use it again.
Our story has finally reached its grim conclusion. But like all good nightmares, it never truly ends. Which of these chilling tales sent a shiver down your spine? Was it the couple that found themselves in the House of Whispers? Or the young lady looking for love in the city, only to find fear? Comment below and share your thoughts if you dare. If you crave more nightmares, more chilling tales of the darkness, like and subscribe to my domain. I'll be here waiting for you, because the stories never die, and neither do I.